Tess Walsh from Market Check. Great to have you back with us on Flow, Tess.
Good to be here, Ricky.
Okay, well, we've got to ask, and I suspect we're going to draw some blanks in other commodities, but Ukraine's situation with Russia moving in, big movements in the grains markets.
Huge movement in the grains market. Arguably, wheat's probably one of the most, the key commodity that's being affected by this crisis, I suppose you'd call it. Yesterday, anyone who trades in the wheat markets were watching the Chicago Board of Trade futures markets trade to something called limit up, which is when markets run away. There's a mechanism that halts trading, and that doesn't happen very often, but it did yesterday. So lots of heat in that market. What's sort of been happening, obviously this whole situation has been burbling along in the background for some time, but the market has been looking for some sort of tangible evidence of supply disruptions out of that region, and it really came overnight. So there's now no exports flowing out of that region until further notice. What that means is that Russia and the Ukraine have about 13 million tonnes of old crop wheat and about the same of corn to export for the remainder of this season. So the market is pricing demand now, or trying to, out of other origins like Europe or the US and even us, although we have capacity constraints to service this additional export demand. We've had such a big crop and our stem is quite booked already. But import demand is likely to rise as countries look to secure more wheat in light of further escalation and risk of executing out of that region.
So when you talk about capacity constraints, is that, not just, I guess, in terms of what we're sitting on and there's so much of it, is it just the freight and then getting it offshore so quickly enough to where it's needed around the world?
Yeah, pretty much. Because we've had such a big crop and because our relative price over harvest was so cheap compared to other origins around the world, a lot of our shipping stem capacity has already been booked up by the trade and, handling our shipping and the supply chain in that area, really isn't built for the size crop that we've had this year just gone and the one last year. We've had 35 million tonne wheat crops. We usually have about 25. So, the system's already under pressure.
Yeah, the limit up mechanism you mentioned earlier, how does that sort of reset? Do they crack it open again and see how crazy it goes the next day?
Pretty much. We'll be waiting around noon today, SA time, to see some of those markets open back up again and what it's going to do today. But, looking forward, like the longer this conflict goes, the more bullish it is for world ag markets, as we need exports to start flowing from these countries as soon as possible. And the other thing is the impact it can have on new crop production. So if we look at wheat, Ukraine is a major producer. So they produce just a little less than us last year. So the longer this conflict goes, the higher the risk that new crop production falls, given access to paddocks and labour and even machinery in that area if this conflict continues.
Yeah, look, it's a serious situation and none of us wanted it to happen in terms of the military side of it, but it's going to have an upside, I guess, for our farmers, not immediately necessarily. Will the farmers, if they're selling at the moment, they're not going to see an immediate benefit? It's probably more into futures?
Yeah, look, the futures have kind of gone off on a tangent with this. Looking at our cash prices and how they're responding, we've seen a bit of a response in New South Wales and Victoria. We saw yesterday new crop APW multigrades in New South Wales hit $400 port. In South Australia, things have lagged significantly. It's more 385, 387 port on the bid. So it kind of, there's a real sense that the trade here are also trying to work out what's going on and what all this means, so they can sort of tackle it or have strategies to tackle it. We're in pretty uncharted waters for across the industry at this point.
Yeah, well, I imagine we've had wars and crises around the world before, but I guess what we produce, relative to the rest of the world, we've got so much more coming off in these last couple of years than in the past. So it's about finding logistical solutions to get it to where it's desperately needed.
That's right. And the key difference with this conflict is just where it is. The Black Sea, Russia, Ukraine, there's huge producers of wheat, and hopefully not, but this is a food security issue the longer this goes on.
All right, Tess, well, we'll keep an eye on that. That's the hot and raging market by the looks of things for Country Viewpoint listeners at the moment. Thanks for your input today. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure.